Go team.
Hey, go team, go team.
All right. Oh, that's a great. We got to leave that one in there. What do you want to talk about today?
I thought you were coming with the topic. No. I wanted to talk about the struggle.
Has this one been burning on your heart?
Yes,
for a
we're
long
really
time?
for months now. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
There's so many things.
I
There's so
know.
many things to talk
Yeah.
about. This is just one
Well,
of many.
yeah. This is so. I think I shared this with you actually a long time ago, but I've lived so much of my adult life out of a set of kind of like an idealism that's overly romanticized.
Yes.
And then, avoiding or evading the challenges and hardships of real life, the reality of my life, by a kind of escapism through, kind of daydreaming or like thinking about, fantasizing about, life will be better when. And I would say going all the way back into the early years of marriage.
So
even
basically
before
setting
marriage.
yourself up for a deep disappointment.
Yeah, pretty much. But here's the other side of this. I was away on vacation recently, and I had a lot of time to think about a number of things. And one of the things I kept chewing on was how, when you listen to social media commentators who are talking about marriage or talking about raising children, oftentimes it's like this super negative gripe, about how hard it is and, how put out, parents can feel, even like Christian commentators or pretty like more conservative commentators. So they don't have an axe to grind ideologically against a traditional kind of marriage and family life and arrangement, but they're still it's like they're sharing their battle wounds with each other, over having to take their kid to the park or do the dishes after dinner or whatever. And it's like, and I just lately I've really like in trying to think about how like what are the contributing factors to young people being cautious and hesitant to jump into marriage and family life, which we talked about in a previous episode. And it occurred to me that maybe that constant barrage of negativity, because on the one hand you have this idealized, like I have to have the perfect setup and scenario to risk the adventure of marriage and family life.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the stream of conversation that comes out through social media commentary is all negative. So you put those two things together, and it's like it creates kind of a conundrum for people, because people will either avoid going in, I think, to marriage and family life because they can't find the perfect scenario, or they go into marriage and family with this very idealized, hyper perfectionistic view of things, and then reality hits. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, this is so hard.
Yeah.
And really the reality is, compared to the whole of human history, you got it actually a lot easier than almost every generation of the human race has ever had it. Because we have so much technology and so many comforts and so many conveniences at our disposal. But somehow changing diapers and, driving your kids around to this and that or whatever is just like the hardest thing in the world. And so that kind of idealized view of things just kind of pops. So anyway, I just that's a long framing, but it's kind of like
it's hard for me to understand that because everything about my marriage is so perfect and awesome.
Well, I've always felt that way about you and Becky. It's just serene and so tranquil all the time.
Yeah,
for you guys.
no, I totally agree, and I think it extends to. This is going to be probably an episode of you and I as sort of the battle-tested veterans sharing our wisdom of life and going beyond what might be perceived as like an insurmountable phase, like something that just is so difficult or hard to navigate. Like in marriage and family life, of course, is like super hard, but I would even extend that to the spiritual life. Like, there's phases that I can specifically remember going through where at the time, it seems like for most people, They come into a certain level of the faith, especially if they've had a powerful encounter with the Lord, and their eyes are like their eyes are open, the veil is pulled back, things are so there's like just a difference in how they're experiencing God, and it sets people up for an expectation that that's always going to be the
Yeah,
case.
right,
And the reality is it's not. And it's the same thing with
right.
like there's like an in a diet a real thing. I forget who wrote about it. Might It doesn't matter. But it's like the in love phase in dating. Like there's this 2 year, I think he gave it, thing where you're willing to overlook all of the faults, all of the worst things about the person in front of you because you're so in love with them that you're almost like blind to it. And then you get married and then you realize all of those things are real, and they confront, like they're right in your face all the time. And so anyway, I think in a culture like this culture right now, I think is has a tendency to really idealize things in a way that no no other culture has. At least I don't remember going into so many things with this sort of expectation of perfection. But there's lessons I feel like we can share
Yeah,
about how to
for
navigate through
sure.
that.
It's interesting because there's, as you were saying, all of that. There's actual neuroscience that backs up in the like the what the brain is doing at different phases. So, for example, when you are first falling for someone, that sort of infatuation phase, there's a different part of your brain that's activated. And actually, one people can become addicted to the experience of falling for someone.
Mm,
But in your brain, when you settle into a relationship, there's a different experience that goes on in terms of neurobiology, where it's a stabilizing experience. So compare it like a hot excuse me, like a hot fire, blazing fire, versus kind of like the warm, really, really hot, like bed of coals. And a lot of marriages don't survive the transition, or a lot of relationships don't survive that transition. And I think part of that is because, first of all, you get familiar with people, and that sort of, that fiery glow kind of subsides.
yeah.
And then you're like, now what? Like, what does it really mean to love a person? And what does it mean to be in it for the long haul? And it's that what I've learned over the years is that it's this kind of abiding, consistent decision daily to just do the loving and good thing in affirmation of the gift that my spouse is to me. And I don't always have the fiery, blazy feeling about doing that. In fact, most times I don't. But doing it creates and forges a relationship between us that now has a resiliency and a stability about it. 29 years in, my wife and I just celebrated our 29th anniversary, where it's like, there's a sturdiness, there's a stability, there's a strength there that we never had in the early years, but we don't have all the infatuation or all of the, the sort of like, really emotionally charged, feelings of, attraction and all of that,
Yeah.
and you hear that, it's kind of cliche, but it's true. And I think that you get to that point by learning how to move beyond the honeymoon phase of any relationship and being able to really make the commitment and be dedicated to the little things day in and day out, week in and week out, that really make a relationship grow and become really, really strong. And it's exactly the same thing with God. I think that when people have that first conversion experience, it's like falling in love with God. It's like what happens. But then when it comes to the hard work of the day in and day out, regiment and routine and discipline of daily prayer and commitment, I think people fall away and they want to go for that mountaintop experience again. So they go to the next conference, or they listen to, their favorite, maybe podcast person who tries to get that energy recharged. And you try to stay in that kind of honeymoon place. And it's like, but we're not meant to. Like there's an inherent immaturity
Yeah.
in that phase of relationality. And God wants us to mature to a place of much deeper, abiding consistency. And 99% of what we're going to have to do in the spiritual life is get up every day and make the effort to make time for Him and to be present to Him and be grateful for all that He gives us, even when we're not all like infatuated
Yeah.
with him, spiritually. And we might have moments here and there where, God gives us a little charge, a little consolation, but the stability, the ability to withstand what the world is throwing at us and to remain a mature and stable Christian person, whether we're talking about just our relationship with God or our marriage, it's just the commitment of time and practice and discipline, of love and dedication
Yeah.
and devotion,
Yeah.
day in and day out, without all of the flair and
Yeah.
all of the fancy that might go with things in the beginning.
Yeah. I feel like the biggest lesson over the years, and this is still something that's ongoing for me, just speaking from the marriage side of things. Yeah, I feel like everybody comes into a marriage still with this kind of selfish aspect to them. If marriage does nothing else, it will dig in to the selfish side of us
Hmm.
and kind of force us to learn how to put that aside. Not to deny everything that we enjoy doing, maybe individually, our hobbies or things like that, but to really not act selfishly all the time. And I feel like in the first years of marriage, that was a hard lesson of like, okay, this is really like a team effort. Like it's not just me and it's not just her. Like it's us together navigating life and really trying to take on or embrace the lesson of like we're really called to help each other become like holier people, right? And so I think where the conflict a lot of times ended up happening is me as Scott wanted to I could easily see the faults in my wife, Becky, and Scott wanted to change Becky,
Yeah.
you know? And so it was this constant battle of like I don't like this aspect of you. What, like, and rather than being able to be humble and understanding, and this is one of the great things we learned also along the way whenever we went to marriage counseling, was each person has their own story. Like she about any situation. Like let's say there's a conflict in the marriage. She has a story from her perspective about that conflict, and I have a story from my perspective about that conflict. And what we were both doing oftentimes was trying to tell each other's story through our own perspective. And it we didn't realize that. It just kind of happened. And so it's like, yeah, lesson number 1 is for me was like a quick realization that if you get into the habit of trying to change your spouse, that's going to make for a very consistently miserable marriage.
It
So,
is.
yeah, you just have to be yeah, you have to, not that you have to accept everything that's, offensive about the other person, but you have to be willing to understand that they have a story about that and like jump into that conversation willing to really listen to what they're talking about,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, they're coming out of their own experience of the situation or their own context, which is not the same, like between a husband and a wife.
Yeah.
It's never the same. But yeah, I had a very similar experience. I probably shared this before, but about 10 years into marriage, I remember I was always praying at God. I've told this story, in our programs, but it's like I was praying at God about Lynn and not praying to God for Lynn. There's a
Mm.
difference. I was praying at God about Lynn,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
wanting him to change her because these things annoyed me and were inconvenient to me.
Yeah.
And I just remember in my prayer one time, the Lord, very clearly said to me, "Look, I didn't ask you to change her. I asked you to love her, and and to love her on her terms, meaning she is where she is right now. She is who she is, and it's not your job to change her or to fix her or to redirect her. Like if there's any change to be done, that's my job, not your job. Your job is just to be an instrument and a conduit of my love and mercy in her life. So be with her in her struggles, be with her in her weaknesses, be with her in her, you know, faults and failures.
Mhm.
Two things happened, I think, over the years as I made that shift, which didn't happen because I woke up the next day and decided I was going to be different. It's taken years and years to learn how to do that. But what I think I learned, what I've learned along the way is that as I, first of all, and we know this from the spiritual life, all the saints tell us this, like work on yourself. Like this is the old, sliver in the log
Amen. Yeah.
problem. If you work on yourself, but then you also open yourself up to receiving the other person as a gift, warts and all. Um, and the combination of those two things leads to a transformation. It changes me because I become a holier man,
Yeah.
but it also opens up space for my wife to be able to look at the areas where she needs to grow without feeling like she's got a constant critic and judge standing in her corner up in her face.
Yeah.
In other words, like I'm in her corner, but I'm in her corner as someone who's with her in her struggle and not against her in her struggle. And that, the problem is that like it just doesn't work when when you're trying to, because if I'm going in to try to fix her, I'm judging her at the same time. Like there's something wrong with you, and I'm gonna fix it.
Yeah.
But if I come at it, I listen to her story. I appreciate her context and the place that she's coming from, and she knows that I'm empathetic there and I'm with her in that struggle.
Yeah.
Then it becomes a joint venture of how can we improve this situation, or how can I reflect on you in a way that helps invite you, into a place where you are curious enough to look at this part of yourself, and vice versa. Like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, like I can listen to her questions, or I can listen to her comments and be open to what she has to say, because I fundamentally trust that she's not trying to re-engineer me, and she affirms and loves me for who I am, even in my weaknesses. But she's also my best friend who's going to try to help me grow and address the areas of myself that are not good. But again, I think that, like that takes time. If you go in with these unrealistic expectations about how your relationship is going to roll, which we all do in the beginning,
Yeah.
and then suddenly it doesn't roll that way within even months of getting married, people can go into a complete crisis and think, "Oh my gosh, why did I get married? How is this ever
Yeah.
going to work?" Maybe,
Yeah.
and it's like, no, 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 like that's on one level, it's kind of normal. Like you don't learn how to be married and how to truly love one another except to have to be thrown into the trenches and learn to do it.
Yeah.
So when I think it's when people of our generation are commenting, or even younger, on the challenges of married life, like we have to do it with a certain realism and not a pessimism or a
Yeah.
cynicism,
Yeah.
but a realism about the fact that it's like it is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to overcome that selfishness and that self-referential way of relating to a person where everything's about my personal prerogative. It's hard to overcome that. But the joy of living married life is the fact that something beautiful emerges over time. It's like the chrysalis, we're the caterpillar, we're entering into this chrysalis, and it might take 2 decades of marriage to come out the other side, the butterfly that God wants us to be,
Yeah.
because there's so much to overcome in ourselves. We don't have sufficient awareness about just how broken and warped our inner life
Yeah.
is.
No, it's a great point.
You know,
And
so
so I want to, yeah, just some thoughts on that because it ties into both like the struggle with maturing in the spiritual life and the struggle with maturing in the married life is whenever I first had my big eye-opening experience of God, there is this expectation that, oh my gosh, this is what the faith is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be like mind-blowing and inspirational all the time. And the truth is, it does touch on, and it's good, I think, to have experiences like that touch on this like deeper desire that we have to be closer to God, to to want that like mountaintop experience. But the reality is, it there's an underlying personal brokenness, I think, in everybody, and for some people it's massive because of many different factors, and for other people it might be little minor things, but everybody has it. There's an underlying set of hurts and wounds and things like that, that if all we do is chase the sort of more external or outward facing stuff, without addressing the internal stuff, not only is our spiritual life never going to mature and grow, but our marriage is never going to become, ultimately, I think, what it's meant to be. Even if the other, and the hard part is that might be something that only one of the spouses is going through
Right.
at a time. And so the frustration can be like, you want to drag the other one
Right.
along and get them to be where you're supposed to be. I mean, I dealt with that a lot. Like as a youth minister, I got to go to all of these incredible conferences and experiences, and at the same time also doing a lot of internal work, and I would get very frustrated because Becky wasn't sort of along the same pace, or didn't have the same sense of urgency or this awareness. And it's, which of course, the invitation from God all the time to be patient, which sucks. That's one of my least favorite virtues that God is always calling me to, but He is, and to be patient. And so yeah, I mean, I feel like that internal. If you're not willing to go internally to deal with those things, and you just want to keep your relationship about the kind of lovey, you know, we're in love, we're, constantly just so thrilled with each other. There is underlying, it's reality. There's underlying things in everybody that ultimately have to be, you have to deal with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's it it comes down to how do we love each other in the challenges of life, not how do we love each other when we aren't facing any adversity. Like,
Right.
and I think that somehow when we face adversity, either within our relationship or within the context of our life, it could be loss of a job, or it could be, a sick child, or, a difficult transition where you have to move, or, whatever. I mean, there's any number of things. It's like, how do we love each other as as spouses during those moments? And what I've realized is that, I had a lot to learn about how to love Lynn in those moments. It's easy to love when you're out to dinner, enjoying a glass of wine and having a great weekend away. I mean, like that's easy. That's like sort
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that's the cherry on top of the well, not on top of the cake, but on top of something that probably doesn't taste as good as cake. you know. But when you get back to real life and you're like, that's when it really counts. It's like, how do I, when she's like been out of shape, or she's tired, or she's irritable, or she's fixating on something, or whatever it is, like, it's like, how do I respond to her? Like right now, how does God want me to love her in this moment? Am I her advocate? Am I affirming her? Am I standing alongside of her? Am I supporting her? Am I releasing the pressure? Or am I adding to it? Am I making demands or expectations that are insensitive or
Yeah.
deaf or blind, or whatever? I have to be discerning about that, and it's just, it's the same thing. Like with our relationship with the Lord, it's like, am I consistent in my responsiveness to God and my receptivity to God, regardless of what's going on circumstantially in my day or in my life? Do I make that time, that effort throughout the day? Because I'm not going to grow in my relationship with the Lord if I just, if it's a relationship of convenience, or,
Yeah.
I'm with you when you're making me feel good and
Mm.
filling me with lots of consolation. Um, but when it feels kind of dry and desert like, I'm going to be like the Israelites and just gripe and grumble about how hard it is and it's so difficult.
Right.
poor me. Um, the other thing I speaking of scripture, like there's a great biblical precedence for what you were saying as I was thinking about it. It's the transfiguration. Is it, when Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up into the mountain of transfiguration, he reveals his glory. And they're elated, and they're kind of like they're having a kind of moment of spiritual ecstasy,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they're just like so caught up in the glory, and they're frightened by it on the one hand, but they're also kind of like at a loss to even know how to respond to that. And it's funny because as soon as the kind of the vision of the glorified Jesus like disappears, and they kind of come to, and the cloud's not there and all that, Jesus, the Gospels tell us that Jesus, it's at that point that he heads down the mountain, and he basically turns his face towards Jerusalem. And he three along the way, three times he predicts his passion, you know, that we're going to Jerusalem, I'm going to be handed over and killed, but in 3 days I'll rise. And it's funny because it's like they almost like don't hear the bit about the resurrection part. They're like, Peter's, initial objection is it's not going to happen. Like that can't happen.
Yeah.
It can't be hard. We can't go from the mountaintop down into this valley of tears and difficulty and struggle, and or we can't leave the promised land with all the spoils of Egypt and then go out in the desert for 40 years. Like what how does that work?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because two more times he predicts it, and one of the times, James and John are asking who gets to sit at the right and left hand side, so they're thinking about their own glory and their own status. And another time they're they're arguing along the way about who's the greatest. The point is they're missing the
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying, no, the way to the glory that you seek is through the dying process that then leads to the resurrection. And I think that is
Mm.
really, that's the paradigm of both the spiritual life and married life. Like if you want everybody to stand up at mass when Father says, we have a couple here who have been married for 65 years, and we want to have them renew their vows, and we want to give them a blessing in mass, and everybody stands and claps and goes, that's amazing.
Right.
Like, wow, that doesn't happen very often. It's like, well, the way that happened is, it isn't like it was a smooth sailing trip
Yeah.
the whole
Right.
time for them.
Right.
I'm sure they went through hell and back multiple times, up and down, the tragedies and triumphs of their life. And the reason why they're standing there at 65 years of marriage, still happy and or happy and the very deepest and best of friends that any two people could ever be in this life, is because they learned how to love each other in all the little day-to-day ways, and they learned how to love God and put God at the center of the relationship.
Yeah.
There's just no way
Yeah.
that they're at church. Like there's no way that you can have that beautiful of a marriage after all those years if you haven't been a
Yeah.
spiritual
Yeah.
couple.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that make it, one is pretty funny. And this goes into the idea of, Becky and I have done all these different assessments, and one of the popular ones is the love languages, and this idea of learning how to love somebody else through their love language, not through ours.
Yeah.
Like, in other words, if I'm words of affection, words of affirmation, and my wife is quality time, I could tell her how beautiful she is all day long,
Yeah.
but she'd be like, I still don't feel like you totally love me. Like,
Yeah.
and so, the I was working our church festival one year, and there's this woman. I hope she's still alive, but she works there every year, and I was in the booth helping her, and she had to have been in her 90s, but still very spry, totally with it mentally. And I was talking to her about her marriage, and because her husband died like 15 years before this, and she was still so the way she talked about him, she was still so like just madly in love with him, and I was like, well, share your secret. What was the secret to it? And she said, well, from my end of it, it was to never say no to him. meaning like
Yeah.
I'm going to like basically have sex with him whenever, like he wanted to.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
That's
that might not be
a
her love
surprising
language,
feminist
right?
position.
But I'm like, oh, and she was like, yep, made for a great marriage. Like, but I think what she was speaking into was the whole idea of like, that probably wasn't the way that she necessarily wanted to be loved, but she knew her husband wanted to feel loved that way. And I think that that's really hard, like, um, not projecting like what we need onto somebody else and thinking that that's what they need. So it's that whole thing of learning to love people in the way where they feel and experience love, because Becky is quality time. So I have to really consciously go outside of my own habits or my own tendencies and be like, okay, what can I do to, or acts of service, like, okay, can I do the dishes once, like, even though I don't want to, I dread doing it, but that is a way where she's like, oh man, yeah, that's like foreplay right there if you do the dishes. Um,
You just really had to go there. I know.
but
I always joke out like I'll be out there vacuuming, the kitchen or the living room, and Lynn's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm making passionate love to you," you
oh
know,
my god,
and it's like
by
because
vacuuming
she's
the
like
floor.
deeds of service and all.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah,
I
yeah.
think the other part of this we have to mention is that I'm sure that was reciprocated. Her husband,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sure, loved
yeah.
her with her in her
Yes,
love language, and it wasn't just that they had a really over sexualized relationship. Maybe
sure.
they did, but most likely he reciprocated, and loved her in the ways that that she
Oh
wanted.
yeah,
Yeah,
makes it a lot easier. Like
yeah.
whenever it's a
Well,
reciprocal
but
thing, it's
that's anticipating the other. Paul
yeah.
talks about this. Anticipate one another. In charity. Like in other words, love people on their terms. That's what I like. So whatever is important and valuable to the other person, like I have to be conscious about and intentional around loving my spouse in that way.
Yeah,
I think that's how God loves us as well.
yeah,
He's always loving us on according to the person He created us to be,
yeah.
and not in some other modality.
Right. I think the other thing, and to keep in mind, or at least that I've learned, is something that seems so eternal, like it's gonna just last forever, never does. Whether it's, and this is one thing, especially as being a dad, like the phases of children's growth, and like the kid that's crying and keeping you up for like a week, where they're colicky or whatever, and they can't get settled, and you're like, why did we do this? Like, this was terrible. I thought having kids was going to be this beautiful experience, and then like a week goes by and they settle down, and you're like, okay, and then you forget about, like,
Yeah.
but these things are always like, most of the time these things are phases if you're committed, I would say, to like a path of maturity in something. If you just always want to remain the same kind of person and you're fighting all the time to like hold on to the old ways of being, then yeah, it's going to be probably a super long battle, but I feel like the whole lesson of marriage and the spiritual life is like God is always calling us deeper or calling us to kind of renewal all the time. Like, and the more willing we are able to do that, the the more quickly we're able to get out of the difficult situation. Here's a great for instance is like Becky and I fell into a period of time where our communication was just, it was at an all-time low. This was probably, I don't know, I want to say 10 years, 12 years into our marriage. And we literally felt like uh, people who were roommates, like living under the same roof, but not really connecting on any, everything was a constant battle. We were in two different trenches. Um, and what we discovered is that our ability to communicate effectively had totally vanished. Like we just sort of lost the that ability to listen, like really listen to each other and then respond in loving ways. And it's so easy to do that. So like the idea of communication and really committing to ways of effective communication. And I feel like it's the same thing in my prayer life. Like when my prayer life is at its driest and seemingly least fruitful, it's because I've stopped really communicating effectively with God. Mostly because I've probably stopped listening
Mhm.
before I speak, if I'm being honest. So it's like you just have to constantly recommit yourself to those lessons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, on communication, I was thinking about how I think in our modern sort of pop psychology environment, there's all these techniques for how to communicate.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but man, I can see right through that. Like if it's not authentic
Well, right. Yeah, it's
communication,
so fake.
I had this this one story years ago. This woman who was probably like my age now. I was working alongside her, and she and her husband were going through counseling on communication.
Yeah.
And she's like, so we're learning how to say I statements. And so we were sitting in a session one day, and he said something that I just thought was just over the top. And so she said, you know, I just really feel like someone in this conversation is a real asshole, and it's not me. And I just like busted up laughing. But I think that kind of like says it all.
Yeah, yeah.
Like the key to good communication is the authenticity and the will to genuinely listen
Yeah.
to what the other person is saying, not just maybe even explicitly, but even inadvertently or maybe indirectly.
Yeah.
Which isn't always fair, because sometimes, like, I find Lynn will say things and she's not forthright enough about what she really wants to say because she's couching it, or she's hoping I
Yeah.
just catch on.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, no, you need to come right out and just
You have
say
to
it.
be very
Yeah.
you have to be able to
Right.
express what's going on.
Yeah. So I think,
Yes.
but the other part too is like you have to really come forward with what is on your mind. Like, don't expect me to read your mind or to read between the lines and figure out what you're really thinking or feeling, because I really don't know. I have some idea, and I might
Yeah.
be right if I guess, but a lot of times I guess wrong, and then you're even more mad at me. So it's not fair for me to have to play this, investigator game, and try to like, be,
Yeah.
first class detective who's trying to
Yeah.
figure out what's on
Yeah.
your mind. Like
Yes.
you need to come right out and say, here's what I need, here's what I want, here's what I'm upset about,
Yeah.
here's what my expectation is, whatever. And then we can talk about it, we can work through it. But I also have to be willing to listen and not just be kind of poised and postured to pounce on her. Like, here's my response. Like, I'm not even really listening. I'm just preparing my rebuttal or my defense or whatever it is. I have to really listen and acknowledge and affirm, that I really hear what you're saying. So I think communication, it is really critical. And you just don't, like, the bottom line is almost every couple is going to suck at communicating when in their first 10 years of marriage.
Yeah.
You just are. But you can't panic and freak out about your relationship because you suck at communicating.
Right.
You got to learn how to communicate with each other. And there's no formulaic recipe for that, because every couple is going to do it a little differently because you have different personalities that are at play. And then when you add kids, it gets even
Yeah.
more complicated, because you not only do you have to communicate with each other, but you have to communicate with each other about the kids, and you have to communicate with the kids. And each of your kids is different, and that gets super complicated. I think the thing that I want to stress is the fact that it's a learning process. And if you're not committed to the learning, like earlier you were talking about, it doesn't always, go the way you think it's going to, and you plan it's going to. And what I was thinking about when you're saying that is that, it's like with the first kid, it's the first time you're doing everything with your first kid.
Yeah.
And I remember I've reflected on this. It's like, oh my gosh, when they were in diapers, the diaper phase, oh, I thought that was the worst. Then they got into the toddler phase, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, the diaper phase was, like, amazing compared to the toddler
Yeah,
phase," you
right,
know?
right.
Then they get into there's a little bit of I find there was with all 4 kids, there was a little bit of a respite from the craziness from,
Yeah,
like, age 7 to 10, because they kinda settle in,
yeah.
and they're kind of at a
They're so
stable.
beautifully compliant.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
you can kind of, like, tote them around for the most part.
yeah.
Okay, then the preteen years come, and then you're like, "Oh my gosh, the teen years."
Monstrosity.
Yeah, and then
They turn
now
into a different
yeah,
species.
I know, and then you're in the young adult years, and now it's like, "Oh, this is the worst yet," because you got all these existential crises that your kids are going through, and they're adults, and you can't tell them what to do anymore
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
don't wanna listen, and, and, they think they know everything, and, anyway, it's the point is that I didn't feel that way about the younger family as they were going through each of those phases because and what I've realized is like, well, I had to cut my teeth on my oldest two, who are pretty close together, on everything. It was like everything we did with them is the first time we're doing this.
Yeah,
And we don't know what we're doing.
right.
And we have to figure it out. And, there's interesting, it's hard because sometimes I think, oh, I feel so bad for my older kids because I made so many mistakes with them. But that's just part of family order with kids. And they
Right.
have a set of qualities that the younger kids don't have, and vice versa,
Yeah.
because they were parented the way they were parented. And my younger kids have a certain set of qualities. But it's funny because the older kids will say, you treat
Oh, of course.
you treat them, so
Yeah.
different than you treated us. And it's like, well, that's because we learned a thing or two
Right.
and we know how to do it better.
That's why we had multiple
Yeah.
kids, because if
But
you fall off, we still have a few others.
but what I always say is like, don't forget that you had a way greater proportion of our attention than the younger kids did because it was just you or
Mm,
just you too for a lot of years,
yeah.
or a number of years. And you had our youthful, more energetic selves as well.
Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
it all works out. The
Yeah.
point is you can't panic about that. Like it's by God's design. It's not like God said, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about birth order before," and I didn't realize that, parents weren't going to know how to raise their kids when they're first starting out. Oh,
Yeah.
by the way, that's why you have grandparents, and why you should lean into your parents a lot when you're first starting out as a family, because even if you think that they screwed a lot of things up, by the time they get to the age of being grandparents, they've learned all the lessons that you as parents haven't learned yet.
Mm,
So they might have screwed it up with you, but they figured out the best way to do things, and guaranteed they're going to be better they're going to be 100% better with your kids than they were with you.
yeah.
But that's why you should listen to them. Just a
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
note, like as a young parent, don't think that your parents don't have wisdom because they didn't do it right with you. Because they figured out the right way to do things by making a lot of mistakes. And that's just the way it is. Like there's a lot of grace, I'm sure. There's just a lot of grace. God graces each one of us, to be able to grow out of and grow from whatever experiences we had. Like I was the middle child of the second family in my family. There was
Mm,
three, and then there was three,
yeah.
and I had a totally different relationship with my parents than my older siblings did, and I think it was in a lot of ways better.
Yeah.
But I also think too that my older siblings have a level of responsibility and maturity and responsibility and discipline that I don't have because my parents let a lot of things go by the time they got to me. Do
Right.
you know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just somehow it all kind of comes out even in
Yeah.
the wash.
Well, here's
So
for me the last thing I'll say in terms of wisdom to be shared is, overall, because we've been married 28 years now, and the hard times, the difficult times, it's hard for me to really remember the specifics about those times. The overall feeling I have is just I love my wife. I love being married to Becky. I love our friendship. I love our relationship. But I know that that's come with a lot of trials and challenges and tribulations, and but the overall is like, man, I couldn't imagine it any other way. And that's a good thing I think it's a good thing, like, to have short memories. It's almost like a wife giving birth, they always say, like, you don't really like, if shortly after, you don't really remember the pain, and I feel like if you're 2 people, or even if you're, one person who's willing to commit to the growth that marriage presents to you personally and as a couple, like, in the end, you're gonna be really rewarded by it, but you just have to not get too zeroed in that moment to be like, "This is never gonna," "This is always gonna be difficult." The only other thing I'll share is, like, people always come up to us, and I'm still baffled by this, and just they love, like, the model of marriage that Becky and I somehow present to the world, which is always mysterious to me because, we're not always walking around as if we're like madly in love with each other. But I think there's just something about the commitment to just loving that person. I think people sense that. Like, I think people sense that there's an underlying commitment to real love that they maybe see, and it's always amazing. I'm always like, oh, wow, like, our kids were acting like total idiots during mass, but someone will come up and be like, it's so beautiful, and it's like, okay, I hope you're seeing something that I'm not seeing in that moment, but
Well,
I do
it's
think it's a commitment to love that people have a
yeah.
sense of. So that's
Well, it's not like an outward perfectionism. That's false. Whenever you see that in the family, I'm always like, that's that's hard won by pure authoritarianism. Like when you like at mass, like you see the perfect. It's like you guys are very real and authentic and transparent, but what lives beneath the surface of all the lack of perfectionism in your family is the fundamental core commitment and dedication to the good of marriage and family life because you love each other. And that's I mean that's just an unquestioned assumption in your whole family in your relationship. And I think it's the same for Lynn and I. I mean, I look back in our family and it's like, oh my gosh, we've screwed so many things up and we've had so many like challenges and problems and I can get sideways thinking, oh my gosh, I'm a theologian and we should be better at this. But the reality is that it's like what's unquestionable in our relationship is that we're best friends and we love to be with each other and we oftentimes fight and disagree and see things completely different, but at the end
yeah,
of the day it's like, so are we going down to the winery tonight, this
yeah,
weekend to
yeah,
go hang out, go go watch a concert or whatever, like we can't wait to get out of the house to be with each other,
yeah,
and to hang out because we're best friends, like,
yeah,
and we just love each other and we love each other in all of our imperfections, but that isn't to say that outcome is the result of a fundamental commitment of lowering, how do I say this, softening the expectations
mm,
around idealism
yeah,
and being committed to this idea that you know that kind of friendship, that kind of relationship matures over time by staying in there day in and day out and learning how to love, letting God teach
yeah, yeah.
us how to love each other and how to love our kids,
Hmm.
knowing that part of the plan God has is for us to get better and better at that over the years. So that by the time we're grandparents, we really are a real resource to our kids because it's like, we know how to do this,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Last thing I want to say really quickly, it keeps popping into my head, but it's like when I was first married, I grew up on sitcoms and every sitcom was like, it's a 30-minute show. There's a unique topic and little drama that's going to unfold in 30 minutes, right? And if it's a family sitcom, it's like, okay, the sitcom spends 10 minutes setting up the problem. Then there's the crisis. Then
Hmm.
they sit down in the living room and they talk it out and it works out. And then that's the end of the episode.
Yeah,
And I was like, I was so frustrated in the first years of our marriage because I would do those kind of like sit downs, like we just talk it out, and I would say all the right things, and then
oh my
everybody would
gosh.
just do all the same things that were making
Yeah,
everything a nightmare, under our roof, and I finally had to learn that it's like, okay, life, you don't button it up like that, like
hmm,
it's the consistent commitment of love over time
yeah,
that works things out without saying, we've got to work this out. We have a problem and we're going to fix that problem because we're going to sit down in the living
Right.
room and we're going to talk about
And
it.
we're gonna do it in 30
Yeah,
minutes because I gotta watch the Cosby
everybody's
Show.
leaving their dishes in the dishwasher, on the countertops and leaving the kitchen a mess all the time. So we're going to sit down and we're going to talk this out, and everybody tomorrow is going to do it perfectly right. It's like I was so frustrated because
man.
nothing ever resolved itself in that way, ever. Like, ever. And I finally just had to accept that. It's like, that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
But it's funny because a lot of TV shows today are TV series that run over multiple years. And that kind of like sitcom is kind of like, it's still around, but it's not the most popular currency. And I think it's good because there's a long story arc and a long narrative. There's an arc of character development over time.
Yeah.
And I think it's the right kind of conditioning when we think about, the way human life really works is that things work themselves out, things get resolved, people mature, conflicts get overcome.
Yeah.
Over time.
Yeah.
By, doing one's best to adhere to a set of principles and a set of practices and commitments, knowing full well that you're going to fail again and again and again at those things, but over time it's going to improve if you stick with it and stay with it. And that's really what makes for, you look at these families that are still together and still committed, even, multi-generationally, and you're just like, how'd you do it? It's like, that's how they did it.
Yeah. Awesome. We'll wrap it up, man.
Oh, okay. Well, we talked about a lot of things today. Idealism can be, I always say that it's never good to let the ideal become the enemy of the good. And I think that the good, in terms of our relationship with the Lord, but also the good in terms of our family relationships, our marriages, and so on, is something that's attained over time, by a commitment to getting better and better and learning how to be a fully integrated and mature person. And to think that we're going to just flip a switch and make that happen in our 20s or even in our 30s, early 40s, I think it was Aristotle that said, you're not really a wise person until you probably get into your mid-40s. So it takes time to mature and to create the kind of relationships and the kind of family life that we want. So if you're young and you're idealizing things, buckle up and commit yourself to the long road and to the long journey, because that's how you get there. If you like this podcast episode, be sure to share it with your friends. Be sure to subscribe and like us. Leave your comments. Send your questions or topics our way, and we'd love to address them.
See ya.
The Wise Guys Podcast is a production of Preambula Group, a Catholic ministry dedicated to helping you thrive in the heart of Jesus. Visit us on the web at preambula.org and follow us on social media.